I hated the rain. I couldn't keep it straight if all the weather oddities were from El Nino, La Nina, or just plain old shitty nuclear-induced climate change. The planet's weather cycles had been unbalanced for the last 90 years after a large nuclear exchange between Russia, China, and India on the other side of the world. The resulting clouds of ash had brought about the enlargement of the polar ice caps and made New Orleans colder and wetter now than it was when my grandparents were kids. The Jeep parked 6 blocks away from the Digital Diva. It was the closest available spot to the club, so I stepped onto the sidewalk for a miserable walk down the lane. The cold September wind made me pull the duster close, and I crammed my hat further down on my head in an effort to keep the rain from dripping down my neck. Besides being generally annoying, the rain made the old wounds on my back itch like crazy. Good times. I checked my wristwatch for the time. Both of the luminous hands fell on the 5. My Jeep made good time without the normal traffic of the city getting in the way. Overhead, police drones circled lazily, scanning the early morning crowds in the district for several threats at once. The drones served 2 primary purposes. The first was to detect radiation. We'd started doing that 50 or 60 years ago, after a terrorist blew up a suitcase nuke in Raleigh, rendering the city a wasteland. The second was more mundane, run-of-the-mill police work. They use a facial recognition software to actively scan every individual and provide a breakdown of their records to the uniformed beat cops. In a pinch, they could also act as backup to a cop in trouble. But then you had to live with the constant ribbing from other officers that a computer nerd back at the NOPD headquarters had saved you. Cops could be brutal when it came to jokes. It was almost better to get killed in the line of duty than to have to face that every day. As I walked, garish neon lights in 1,000 different colors announced the pleasures that awaited a customer in any of the clubs along the lane. Doormen called out to me, trying to lure me into their establishment for the hour of my life. I ignored them. It was easier that way. Most of them were lifelong residents of Easytown. They grew up as swindlers and cheats. You show any interest, and they'll swoop in for the kill. Sometimes literally. The Digital Diva was still a couple of blocks away. I didn't even need to read the sign to remember which one it was. Their doorman stood underneath the building's oversized awning, looking forlornly into the street without shouting at any of the passers-by. Yeah, that's the place. Tiny droplets of water fell from the brim of my fedora as I looked down to watch my footing on the treacherous sidewalk. The streets and sidewalks of Easytown were uneven in most places, and downright dangerous for the unobservant. I swear the city simply poured concrete over whatever'd been on the ground, without any preparation or leveling of the area. Given how dangerous the side streets were for non-residents, that's probably what happened. Once, 50 years ago, maybe more, the whole neighborhood had been underwater. Then, after the war, the weather began to get colder and sea levels receded as the ice packs grew. Lake Bourne dried up and the already overpopulated city scrambled at the opportunity to grab land behind the new seawalls. But supply couldn't keep up with demand as people fled southward from the deepening cold up north. A dangerous shantytown of clapboard and sheet metal homes sprang up in the reclaimed land overnight. The mayor and city council passed an emergency funding measure to pave a few streets through the mud and then tax the residents for their use. Voila! Easytown was born.